Welcome back to Based MMA. In this video, we're going to try to save UFC 301 because, it's pretty obvious now that UFC 301 is not the best of cards. And before I even explain how I think we can save this card, I'm just going to keep it real with you guys. I'm going to keep it absolutely real with you guys and just say that, we were due for a correction. I mean, UFC 298 was incredible. 299 was also pretty amazing. And 300 is also looking pretty stacked. So if you're a logical and reasonable person, you would know that in a way we were kind of due for a correction because I mean a lot of champions have already defended their belt. We're only 3-4 months into the year, so obviously these champions need to take time off. Right now we don't really have like big stars fighting. This card is also taking place in Brazil, so I don't think we would see like Adesanya fighting on this card. So you also have to take that into consideration when thinking about this card. And I know at first glance we look at the card and we're like, UFC is charging $85 for this card when it's like a glorified fight night. It's like a good fight night at best, and you try to sell it for $85. I completely understand the criticism of UFC 301. I'm not saying that it's an amazing card and that you should just accept it, but what I'm saying is that, if you were being realistic, we were due for a correction when it comes to these pay-per-views because, UFC 297 was bad. I think UFC 297 was actually worse than UFC 301. I know that at least with UFC 297, we had the Strickland versus DDP matchup, which was an amazing matchup, which is a matchup that a lot of us fans were looking forward to. And I feel like with UFC 301, we don't really have like that one matchup. You know what I'm saying? Like Pantoja Usyk, like it's kind of a meme, but it's not like a fight where you're like, oh man, I can't wait for it. Like people are actually going to be talking about it. You know what I'm saying? Like how we were talking about DDP and Strickland. So because of that, I think the card is lacking a bit of star power. So in this video, I'm going to save the card, and it's going to be a realistic plan, okay? I'm not going to, all of a sudden put Adesanya and put, Conor McGregor on UFC 301 to save the card. It's not going to be any type of that. It's going to be a little bit more realistic. And talking about being realistic, Alex Pereira is not going to be fighting on this card. And I do not care if he knocks out Jamal Hill in the first round at UFC 300. That is so unrealistic. And it's so unrealistic for him to make a quick turnaround 1 month later to fight Magomed Ankalaev, his hardest matchup in the division. Like his hardest stylistic matchup in the division. And if you're an Alex Pereira fan, why would you want Pereira to make a 1 month turnaround to fight his hardest matchup in Magomed Ankalaev, and you're giving Magomed Ankalaev the time to prepare? And also from his point of view, like how is he gonna like fully prepare in the training camp if he doesn't know if this fight's gonna happen for sure until after April 14th? So it's not realistic. Pereira versus Ankalaev, as much as it would be an awesome main event for 301, it would save the card. It's not a realistic thing. I'm not saying that it's impossible for it to happen, but if we're being honest with ourselves, the chance of that happening, and also how smart is that for Alex Pereira to like, how smart would that be for him to do? In my opinion, it would be a very stupid move for Alex Pereira to take a fight 1 month later to fight his hardest matchup. Maybe some of you guys would see it as like badass, and I mean props to him, but in my opinion it would be a very, very dumb move. Like I said, it's not very realistic, so I'm kind of removing that possibility out of the window. If it ends up happening, great. If it doesn't, okay. But as fans, guys, we have to be realistic, and Alex Pereira defending his title against Magomed Ankalaev, assuming he wins against Jamal Hill, which I think is also a big if, because I think that fight is kind of a 50-50 fight. Like, let's be real with ourselves. Now, the second thing, I think the guy that can save this card is Paulo Costa. And Paulo Costa just had a pretty fun fight against Robert Whittaker, where I thought he looked pretty decent. Even though he hadn't fought in a couple years, I thought he did pretty well against Robert Whittaker, where people thought he was going to get absolutely destroyed by Robert Whittaker. The fight was actually more competitive than some of us were expecting. I did pick Paulo Costa to knock out Robert Whittaker. It almost happened in the first round, but still, I was still pretty impressed with Paulo Costa. And I would like to see Paulo Costa fight a Mavov on this card. I think that if they were to add that fight on this card, I would think it would be pretty fantastic. It would be a pretty fun fight in the middleweight division. I get that it's not a fight that would necessarily sell a bunch of pay-per-views, but as a hardcore fan, I would definitely be more interested in the card if they added Paulo Costa. Now, I think Paulo Costa versus Roman Dolidze would also be a pretty good fight, and I think it would be a pretty good fight for Paulo Costa too, so he could like a I think he would easily win that fight. So I would much prefer that matchup. But I think the Imavov matchup would be more entertaining for the fans. So I think if he fights an Imavov or Jared Cannonier, I I put Hamza Chimaev, but I don't think there's a good chance of him fighting Hamza Chimaev at this point. I don't see why Hamza Chimaev would probably take this fight, especially if he's going through Ramadan. I don't know if he would be ready to fight in May. But I think Roman Dolidze, Imavov, Jared Cannonier would be good opponents for Paulo Costa. And any of those fights, I think, would be pretty entertaining. So I think Paulo Costa could save this card. Another matchup that people have been talking about, and I absolutely love, Edson Barbosa versus Josh Emmett. I think that would be an incredible fight to add to UFC 301. I think that would be an amazing fight. I mean, Edson Barbosa, Josh Emmett coming off that knockout, Edson Barbosa coming off that impressive win over Sadiq Youssef. I think would be an entertaining matchup. Another fight. Now, this is kind of a most likely it's not gonna happen, but if I were the UFC, I would move Renato Moicano versus Jalen Turner to UFC 301. And I think it would really help the card because now let me read to you the main event. I mean the main card. Pantoja versus Usyk, Paulo Costa versus Imavov or Cannonier or Dolidze, Jose Aldo versus Jonathan Martinez, Edson Barbosa versus Josh Emmett, and Renato Moicano versus Jalen Turner. I understand that it's not as good as UFC 298, 299, or 300, but I think there's a lot of fun matchups there. And I think that even though it's not the best card ever, and like I said, we have to be realistic that we were kind of due for a correction at this point because we had been getting back-to-back stacked pay-per-views. I think those fights would be amazing for UFC 301 and in my opinion would absolutely save the card. So those are my thoughts on how we could save UFC 301 that is realistic, right? Because we're not going to get Israel Adesanya. We're not going to get a Conor McGregor. Or, you know what I'm saying? A lot of the fighters that we want to see right now, they just fought. I mean, Sean O'Malley just fought. Topuria just fought. Dricus du Plessis just fought. So a lot of these fighters have already fought. So we're probably not going to see them probably until summer or late summer. I mean, we know June is probably going to be Islam Makhachev. I think we'll see Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis also in June. They have a big Saudi Arabia card. They have big cards in July as well. So I don't really see them putting big names at UFC 301, but I think the card could be saved with a lot of fun matchups. A lot of fun matchups, a lot of Brazilians, and I think the card will be just fine. So anyway, guys, please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.